Welcome to HQ, where the lessons are a few minutes and the learning lasts a lifetime. In yesterday's video, we covered what could have happened to the lost colony. In today's, we're going to look at what happened to the first permanent English settlement in what would become America, Jamestown. Now, Jamestown was founded in 1607 by the Virginia Company, and unlike the Puritans, who we would know as Pilgrims up in New England, the people who came via the Virginia Company came looking for gold and looking for profits. They weren't looking really for religious freedom. But what they found instead was just simply disease and starvation, especially early on. Hundreds and hundreds of people died early on in Jamestown, with one especially bad case being something called the Starving Winter in 1609 to 1610, where in December of 1609 you had around 220 people living in Jamestown and in the Chesapeake area. But by the spring, only 60 were remaining. So that's 160 people who died. And that's characteristic of early Jamestown. They would have periods of big growth and then periods of huge decline due to starvation and due to disease. Because they built this Jamestown, they built this right next to a swamp, which is definitely not a good place to build because it breeds malaria and malaria-bearing mosquitoes, and it's not good places to drill for wells to get your water, and the water is very brackish around the Chesapeake Bay at this area, so there's no good water source, which leads to a lot of deaths. Also, the people the Virginia Company brought over are a mix of vagrants and gentlemen who, it's a very motley crew of people, but these people have one thing in common, and that's they do not know how to farm. So you have no food early on, which leads to something called, the Starving Winter, or the Terrible Winter of 1609 to 1610, where people are eating shoes, people are eating rats, dogs, horses, and end up eating each other. There's one case, you can go view the bones actually in Jamestown today, of a woman who was eaten by her husband. That's how bad things got. Now, Jamestown does steadily improve, though. Remember, I talked about those basically like a boom and bust cycle for Jamestown. The boom years happen later on, especially after 1616, where this guy named John Rolfe, who coincidentally married Pocahontas, and unlike Disney where it says John Smith did, John Rolfe actually did. A bunch of Johns in this story, but anyway. John Rolfe grew tobacco for the first time in Jamestown in 1616, and this is very important because Jamestown needed a source of revenue to make itself viable to the English crown. It needed a reason for people to come. They would send vagrants who had no other option and gentlemen who thought they could find gold, but there was no gold there, and after a few years, less and less people started coming. But once tobacco was found and you could make a lot of money off of tobacco, people started flocking to the New World. So Jamestown's really important because not only is it the first permanent English settlement in what would become the United States, but it's also the first English settlement that grows tobacco, which then ends up fueling and kick-starting the rest of the English colonization of the South, especially. The North we're going to get into tomorrow about why people settled there, but the South becomes especially about finding land to grow crops, namely tobacco and later on rice and cotton. That's essentially Jamestown in a nutshell. It ends up being the capital of Virginia for about 90 years. It's burned down in 1690, and we're going to cover that later when we cover the revolutions of that period. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like. It means a lot to me here at HQ, and if you don't want to leave a like, that's okay too. Well, anyways, this is HQ signing off for now. I'll see you next time.